She thought she controlled the neighborhood until the internet turned against her. It all started when the HOA decided that their Wi-Fi tower, placed near Mark's backyard, was community property. Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, strutted into Mark's driveway one morning holding a clipboard like a sword. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "the HOA router is under your roofline. That means the HOA can use your internet. It's policy." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Policy, or just your personal freeloading plan?" Karen smiled with false sweetness. "You'll cooperate, or I'll fine you for noncompliance." Tyler, listening from the porch, grinned. He already had an idea, and it involved the router. That evening, the Silverstone Ranch was unusually quiet. The sun had melted into the hills, painting the rooftops with lazy orange light. Inside his room, Tyler Ellison, Mark's 17-year-old son, sat cross-legged at his desk, surrounded by glowing monitors, a tangle of Ethernet cables, and the soft hum of revenge in the making. He'd overheard the HOA board earlier that day bragging about how community internet access was one of the benefits of paying fees. But Mark hadn't approved any shared service plan. It gnawed at Tyler's mind until curiosity became mission. So after dinner, he slipped on his headphones and logged in. The familiar black interface blinked to life, the gateway into the Silverstone HOA network. He typed a few commands, his fingers dancing with practiced precision. Within minutes, his screen filled with usage data, IP addresses, streaming devices, security cameras, dozens of them. He frowned. The router's administrator name glared back at him in bold text. "Mark Ellison Home Network." "Unbelievable," he muttered. They hadn't even set up their own service. They'd literally piggybacked on his dad's account, running their board meetings, streaming reality shows, even using his bandwidth for HOA surveillance cameras. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the subdivision, had basically turned Mark's Wi-Fi into her personal fiefdom. Tyler smirked, leaning back in his chair. Well, time for a little correction. He cracked his knuckles, opened the router dashboard, and began typing. First, he changed the SSID, the Wi-Fi name, to HOA free ride disconnected. Next, the password. Pay your own bills, 123. He hit Save Changes. For a second, the entire network flickered, then vanished. All the freeloaders' devices dropped off instantly. Security cameras blinked into darkness. Karen's streaming night turned into buffering purgatory. Tyler grinned. Operation Karma is live. The next morning arrived with the fury of a storm. Mark stood on his porch, sipping his coffee, enjoying the crisp air and the faint sound of chaos echoing through the cul-de-sac. From across the street, Karen Henderson, president of the Silverstone HOA, burst out of her house in slippers and a bathrobe, phone in one hand, panic in the other. "The Wi-Fi's down," she shouted to anyone who'd listen. "The HOA network isn't working. Somebody hacked us." Her husband, still in pajama pants, shouted from inside, "Honey, the cameras are offline too." Karen stomped toward the sidewalk, glaring at the neighborhood like a general surveying a battlefield. "It's a cyber attack, a violation of HOA data policy. Call the IT committee." There wasn't an IT committee, but that didn't stop her. Across the street, Mark calmly stirred his coffee. "Morning, Karen," he called, his tone casual, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "Network trouble." Karen turned toward him, frazzled. "Mark, yes. The entire HOA internet infrastructure went down last night. Do you have Wi-Fi? We need to trace the signal." Mark looked thoughtful. "Oh no, ours is fine." She frowned. "You're connected." He took a slow sip, savoring the moment. "Perfectly. Haven't had any interruptions." Then, with deliberate timing, he added, "Maybe heaven's telling you to pay for your own service." Karen blinked, confused. What's that supposed to mean? Before Mark could answer, her phone buzzed. She looked down and froze. The HOA group chat was blowing up. Stacy, does anyone know what happened to the Wi-Fi? Ben, look at the network list. What's HOA free ride disconnected? Nina, OMG, the new password says pay your own bills 123 face with tears of joy. Karen's face turned red enough to power a small furnace. Who did this? This is cyberbullying, she barked. From his window upstairs, Tyler could barely suppress his laughter. He watched as Karen stormed around her driveway, waving her phone like a sword of justice, completely oblivious that her enemy was a teenager in noise-canceling headphones eating cereal. By noon, the entire neighborhood knew. The HOA's precious, shared network had been exposed as a glorified case of bandwidth theft. Some residents were furious, others couldn't stop laughing. A few even thanked Mark quietly for standing up to the board's nonsense. That evening, Karen held an emergency HOA meeting to address the hacking incident. Mark attended purely out of curiosity. Karen slammed a folder onto the table. Whoever did this committed a serious breach of HOA digital property. Mark raised an eyebrow. You mean my router? The room fell silent. Karen blinked. What? You were using my internet. The bill goes to my name. The equipment's registered to my address. The only hacking I see is someone logging into my network without permission. Murmurs spread through the room like wildfire. Even Karen's allies shifted uncomfortably. Tyler, sitting quietly in the back, pretended to scroll his phone, though inside he was glowing with pride. Mark leaned forward. Now, unless the HOA wants to reimburse me for 3 months of overage fees and stolen bandwidth, I suggest everyone gets their own service plan. Karen tried to stammer out a response, but no words came. Mark stood, adjusted his jacket, and smiled. Oh, and by the way, if you ever want a community network, I know someone who can help set it up securely. He glanced toward his son. Tyler looked up, pretending innocence, but the smirk gave him away. Karen's jaw tightened. Fine, she hissed. We'll get our own network. Excellent, Mark said, finishing his coffee. Just make sure you pay your own bills. That night, as the stars shimmered over Silverstone Ranch, father and son sat on the porch. Too much? Tyler asked, trying to hide a grin. Mark chuckled. No, just enough. He looked up at the night sky, where the Wi-Fi signal of HOA free ride disconnected still blinked faintly in the distance. A silent digital monument to poetic justice. Funny thing, Mark murmured. Sometimes the smallest password can unlock the biggest truth. Tyler tilted his head. What truth? That when people live off others long enough, Mark said, smiling, they forget how to connect on their own. The wind stirred, the router lights blinked. And somewhere in the neighborhood, Karen's TV flashed no internet connection. Justice had never felt so satisfying. By noon, the Silverstone Community Center buzzed with chaos. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting, a term that usually meant Karen Henderson had lost control of something she once thought she owned. The glass-walled hall was packed with anxious residents, whispering among themselves, clutching their phones as if the missing Wi-Fi had stolen a piece of their souls. At the front of the room, Karen stood behind the podium, her usual polished composure replaced by visible fury. Order, she shouted, pounding the gavel like a judge who'd forgotten she wasn't one. We have suffered a massive cyber attack on HOA property. Our security systems are down, our cameras disabled, and our records compromised. The crowd murmured. A few neighbors looked skeptical. One man in the back muttered, "What records? The snack fund." Karen ignored him. And, she continued dramatically, the source of this attack has been traced to the Ellison household. A ripple of gasps spread through the room. At that exact moment, Mark Ellison walked in calm, collected, and holding a neat black folder under his arm. His son, Tyler, followed behind him with his laptop, earbuds hanging from his neck, and the unbothered look of someone who already knew how this would end. Karen straightened her blazer as if preparing for battle. "Mr. Ellison," she said, with a tight smile that could have cut glass, "thank you for joining us. Perhaps you can explain why your household has been interfering with official HOA operations." Mark stopped at the center of the room, laid the folder on the table, and said evenly, "Gladly. But I think, once you see what's inside, you'll realize who's been interfering with whom." He opened the folder. Neatly printed documents slid across the table: service bills, network reports, and data usage summaries from the internet provider. Mark tapped one with his pen. "This, right here, is my home internet account. The same account that your HOA's community network has been running on for 3.5 months." Karen blinked. "That's impossible." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Is it? Because I have billing statements showing data spikes every Tuesday during your board meetings, streaming traffic during movie nights, and camera feeds uploading from devices labeled HOA front gate and Karen camera backyard." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Several board members turned toward Karen, confused. She adjusted her necklace nervously. There must be a mistake, perhaps some sort of overlap. Tyler cleared his throat. "Actually," he interrupted politely, "it's not an overlap." Karen glared at him. "Excuse me, young man, this is a professional meeting." Tyler smiled. "Then you'll love this presentation." He opened his laptop, connected it to the projector, and with a few keystrokes, the big screen at the front of the room flickered to life. A digital map appeared, glowing blue nodes branching like constellations. Each node represented a device that had been connected to Mark's network over the past month. Tyler zoomed in. Labels began popping up beside the nodes. Karen laptop. HOA president iPad. Karen camera front door. Karen camera backyard. Board treasurer iPhone. Silverstone Club room TV. Gasps rippled through the audience. A few residents covered their mouths. One older man snorted a laugh that he tried to disguise as a cough. Tyler gestured to the screen. "These," he explained, "are all unauthorized devices that accessed our router. Here, the login timestamp, and here's the data usage. As you can see, the system wasn't hacked by us. It was being leached from us." He clicked again and a new chart appeared. Total bandwidth used by HOA devices, 874 GB. Someone in the audience whispered, 874. Karen froze, her face turning the shade of sour milk left in the sun. That data can't be accurate. I don't even use that much." Tyler smirked. "You might not, but your backyard cameras sure do, especially the one streaming 24/7 to a cloud service in another state." The crowd erupted into chatter. "What? She's been recording the neighborhood. That's not legal." Karen slammed her gavel again, her voice cracking. "Quiet, this is all taken out of context." Mark crossed his arms. "I'm sure it is. Just like the HOA, shared maintenance fund, that somehow went toward installing those cameras in your yard." Her jaw dropped. "How did you?" "I checked the expense reports," Mark said smoothly. "Public record. You might have forgotten that I'm an attorney." The room went still. Even the ceiling fan seemed to stop turning. Karen's closest allies, Ben, Stacy, and the ever-loyal Nina, exchanged awkward glances. Ben cleared his throat. Maybe we should take a look at the documentation before." Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to peel paint. "Don't you dare." Mark smiled slightly. "Oh, I think you should, because this," he held up another paper, "is a signed copy of the HOA's terms of network usage. You claimed the network was community funded, yet every byte of bandwidth and every router cost is under my personal name." He leaned forward, voice steady. Meaning you've been stealing internet service and using it to monitor homeowners without their consent. A collective gasp filled the hall. Karen's voice wavered. You can't prove that. Tyler turned the screen again. A live feed appeared, Karen's backyard camera, still trying to connect through the disabled network. The display read, "Connection lost to Ellison router." The irony hit the crowd all at once. Laughter broke out in waves. Karen's face went pale, then red, then white again, cycling through the colors of defeat. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "You can't just show private data." Mark's tone hardened. "Then perhaps you shouldn't have used someone else's network to store it." Karen's voice cracked. "This meeting is adjourned." "No," said one of the residents, a quiet woman from the second row. "This meeting is just beginning. We deserve to know what else the board has been hiding." Applause rippled through the room. The tide had turned. Karen grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit, muttering about legal counsel and data sabotage. But before she could escape, Tyler called out cheerfully, "Hey, Mrs. Henderson." She stopped, teeth clenched. He grinned. "You might want to check your email. The network just sent you the final invoice marked past due." Karen spun on her heel and disappeared through the door, her muttered outrage fatting down the hallway. Mark exhaled and looked around at the faces of the gathered homeowners, the people who'd endured her control for years. "Let's be clear," he said. "This wasn't a hack, it was a wake-up call." A murmur of agreement filled the room. Tyler shut his laptop, smiling faintly. "Think she'll calm down?" Mark chuckled. "Karen, calm? No, but she'll learn." He looked up at the flickering projector screen, still showing the final network name, bold and unmistakable. HOA free ride disconnected. It glowed like a symbol of quiet rebellion, the day the community finally saw through the illusion of control. And for the first time in years, Silverstone Ranch felt connected in all the right ways. The room was still buzzing from Tyler's presentation when Mark Ellison slowly rose to his feet. The quiet confidence in his posture silenced the whispers almost instantly. He gathered the papers before him, neat, deliberate, and then looked straight at the HOA board. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone calm but sharp, "we've seen proof that my home network was used without authorization, but that's not the worst part." A tense murmur ran through the hall. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting toward the exit. Mark noticed and smiled faintly, like a man who already knew what was coming next. He turned toward the projector. "You all believed these so-called security cameras were for the neighborhood's protection, to keep driveways and roads safe. But the data logs tell a different story." He clicked a button on the remote. The projector blinked. Then the screen filled with images, grainy but clear enough to make the audience gasp. Camera angles that weren't aimed at streets or community entrances. Instead, they were pointed directly into private backyards, patios, and windows. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's my house," someone shouted. "Is that my garden shed?" "She was filming inside my yard." Mark zoomed in on the corner of one frame, the watermark, HOA security key. "Karen Henderson," he said, turning toward her. "These cameras were purchased using HOA funds, installed with HOA labor, but configured under your personal account. Care to explain why they were aimed at private property instead of public spaces?" Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. Mark didn't wait for an answer. "Let's take a closer look." He clicked again, and a video clip began to play. The footage was dated just 2 weeks earlier. The timestamp, 3:42 p.m. The video showed Karen herself, walking briskly through a neighbor's backyard, clipboard in hand, camera strapped around her neck. She crouched beside a flower bed, muttering into her phone. "Grass too tall, weeds visible, possible violation," she said in the recording. Then she moved closer to the window, peering inside before walking off-screen. The crowd gasped collectively. Another clip played Karen climbing over a short fence, inspecting a swing set and snapping photos. Another, walking through yet another yard uninvited, shaking her head disapprovingly. The room erupted in disbelief. "That's trespassing. She went into my yard last week. I thought she had permission from the board." Mark looked toward the stunned board members. "You didn't approve this, did you?" None of them spoke. One of the secretaries, Stacy, sank lower into her seat, muttering, "Oh my God, we thought she was just checking property lines." Karen's voice finally cracked through the noise. "This is taken out of context," she shouted. "Those cameras were meant for community monitoring, for safety." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Safety from what? Overgrown shrubs." A few people snickered. Karen's face turned crimson. "I was doing my job as president, keeping the neighborhood standards intact." Mark's tone sharpened. "By sneaking into people's yards and recording them without consent." He held up a printed document. "According to Section 7.3 of the Silverstone Homeowners Charter, no member of the board may enter private property or record residence without explicit permission. That includes you." He turned to the audience. "And since these cameras were funded by your HOA fees, every one of you unknowingly paid for her surveillance system." A collective gasp swept the room. "You mean we funded her spying?" someone exclaimed. Tyler leaned toward the microphone, adding quietly, "And if it helps, the IP logs show she accessed the camera feeds from her laptop every night between 10 p.m. and midnight." The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen's confidence crumbled. That's not true," she stammered. "This is a personal attack, a smear campaign." Mark folded his arms. "No, Mrs. Henderson, this is accountability." Two officers from the local sheriff's department stood by the door. They had been called earlier by a concerned resident after the meeting began. When the evidence appeared on screen, one of them stepped forward. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "we're going to need to take a statement regarding those recordings, and we'll need access to the storage drives." Karen froze, color draining from her face. "You can't do this. This is a private HOA matter." The officer shook his head. "Not anymore. Recording private residences without consent is a criminal offense. The city prosecutor will decide how to proceed." She backed away, clutching her bag, but the room was already turning against her. "You watched our homes," a woman cried. "You're sick." "My kids play in that yard," another shouted. "You used our money for this." Karen looked around for support, but the board members were silent, eyes downcast, hands folded. Even her loyal ally Ben whispered, "I didn't sign up for this, Karen." Mark stepped forward, his voice calm once more. "The truth is simple. You used public trust for private control, and when people started asking questions, you called it an attack." He paused, looking around the room. "But this community deserves better. People deserve privacy, respect, and the right to live without being watched." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a voice from the crowd, a quiet man near the back, said what everyone was thinking. "I motion to remove Karen Henderson as HOA president." A dozen hands went up instantly, then 2 dozen, then nearly the whole room. The vote was unanimous. Karen's gavel, the same one she'd slammed so confidently for years, now sat in front of her like a relic of lost power. She stared at it for a moment, trembling before turning and storming out, the click of her heels echoing like the final toll of a bell. Within the week, everything changed. Karen was officially removed from her position. The board called for an internal audit. The local police opened an investigation into misuse of community funds and illegal surveillance. The once feared HOA queen became the talk of the town, not as a ruler but as a warning. Mark was asked to step in temporarily as acting president until a new election could be held. He declined. "I didn't fight to take her place," he told the board. "I fought to remind everyone why we formed this community in the first place: trust." Tyler, sitting beside him, smiled. "And maybe a bit of Wi-Fi justice." Mark chuckled, "That too." That night, as the sun dipped below the Silverstone Hills, father and son stood on their porch again. The network was quiet now. No stolen signals, no secret cameras, no digital parasites hiding in the shadows. Just peace. Tyler looked up at the stars. "You think people will learn from this?" Mark nodded slowly. "Some will, some won't, but one thing for sure." He glanced at the router blinking inside the window, steady, secure, and free. "No one," he said, "ever forgets the day truth finally logs in." Karen's fury hadn't cooled. If anything, it burned hotter than ever. After being stripped of her title and humiliated in front of the HOA board, she marched straight to Mark's driveway that morning, heels clicking like gunfire against the pavement. "You will restore my internet, Mark Ellison," she barked, waving a clipboard like it was a royal decree. "As per HOA Section 12, community services must remain." Mark didn't even look up from his coffee mug. "Karen," he said, "your community service was me paying your bills, the free ride, over." But Karen wasn't backing down. "If you don't restore it, I'll call the police for cyber harassment. I know my rights." That's when Tyler appeared at the doorway, grinning mischievously, laptop tucked under one arm. "Don't worry, Dad," he said. "I've got this." Karen smirked. "Finally, some sense in this house." Tyler set his laptop on the porch railing and began typing rapidly. Lines of code flickered across the screen, access logs, device traces, a maze of digital threads. Mark watched quietly, sipping his coffee. "There," Tyler said after a moment, "all set." Karen's phone chimed. A new Wi-Fi network had appeared. HOA president only. "See," she said smugly, connecting instantly. "That wasn't so hard." Her words cut off as her screen flickered black. A message appeared in bright red letters across the center. "Unauthorized access detected. Internet privileges revoked, courtesy of the Ellison network." Karen froze. The message blinked twice, then the speakers on her phone let out a sarcastic goodbye chime before the connection cut off completely. What is this?" she sputtered. Tyler leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "It's a decoy router. Think of it as a digital timeout chair." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't do that." "Oh, I can," Tyler replied. "Because this network isn't on your property. It's on ours. And according to the data logs, you've been trying to connect to our system 12 times in the last hour. That's attempted unauthorized access, a federal violation." Mark nearly chuckled into his coffee. "Tyler, maybe she just really misses the free Netflix." Karen's face turned crimson. "This is harassment. I'll sue." "Be my guest," Mark said, handing her a small USB drive. "That's a copy of all your previous data theft activity. I'm sure the police will love a sequel." She snatched the drive from his hand, trembling with outrage, and stomped off down the driveway. But before she reached her car, every smart device she owned, her watch, her phone, even her car's infotainment screen, flickered for a split second, displaying the same mocking message. "Wi-Fi is a privilege, not a right." The neighbors who'd gathered outside couldn't contain their laughter. Even old Mr. Jennings from across the street gave a thumbs up from his porch. Karen slammed her car door, muttering something about ungrateful tech people, and sped off. Tyler watched her leave, then turned to his father. "Think she learned her lesson?" Mark smiled faintly. "People like Karen don't learn lessons. They just lose power until they find someone else to blame." Tyler nodded, then added with a grin, "At least now the neighborhood internet, finally free, and the bandwidth's faster than ever." Mark laughed quietly. "Justice with a signal boost, I'll take it." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the Ellisons' Wi-Fi hummed peacefully, secure, private, and finally theirs. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Karen sat fuming at her frozen laptop, clicking refresh again and again, only to see one message glowing mockingly on the screen. Connection failed, freedom not found. And for the first time in a long time, silence ruled the HOA. 2 weeks later, under a warm amber sunset, the Silverstone community gathered in the clubhouse for an election that would mark the end of chaos and the start of something better. The air buzzed with quiet excitement. Neighbors who once whispered complaints now whispered hope. When the votes were counted, the result was unanimous. Mark Ellison was the new HOA president. The applause that followed wasn't loud or wild. It was steady, heartfelt, and filled with relief. For the first time in years, people felt their neighborhood might finally belong to them again. Mark stood at the podium, his suit crisp but his voice calm and sincere. He looked around the room at faces once divided by petty rules and power games, and began. The purpose of an HOA isn't to control people, it's to protect their peace, and peace begins with respect. He paused, letting that settle. Then, with the confidence of a judge and the clarity of a leader, he introduced his first act as president. From this day forward, privacy, respect, and personal responsibility are mandatory. And let it be written clearly, nobody, and I mean nobody, touches another person's Wi-Fi. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even the sternest board members smiled. The humor broke years of tension because everyone remembered how it started. Mark continued. We're going digital, transparently. No more secret fines, no fake maintenance fees, no hidden approvals. Every decision, every expense, every vote will be public. Behind him, Tyler, now a small legend in Silverstone, stood with his laptop glowing. He had built the new HOA management portal himself. Its interface was clean and modern, with a community message board, maintenance tracker, and a section called Respect First, where homeowners could report issues directly without fear of retaliation. I made sure it's hacker-proof, Tyler said proudly, and troll-proof, especially Karen-proof. The room burst into laughter again. Even Mark chuckled before raising his hand to calm them. Let's be fair. Everyone deserves a chance to start over, even those who forgot what leadership means. At the far end of the table sat Karen. No longer in charge, no more special seat, just another homeowner with a standard ID badge that read resident. Her shoulders were tense, her lips tight. She avoided everyone's gaze, pretending to read the meeting agenda, but the weight of every whisper, every chuckle, every rule she'd once abused now pressed down on her. When the meeting ended, Mark walked over to her quietly. Karen, he said, his tone firm but not cruel. This community isn't your enemy. It never was. The rules apply to everyone now, including fairness. She nodded without looking up. I know, she muttered. I just wanted things to be perfect. Mark gave a faint smile. Perfection doesn't come from control, it comes from respect. He walked away, leaving her to sit in silence, a silence she couldn't manipulate or mute anymore. Outside, the Silverstone ranch felt different. The evening breeze carried laughter, not tension. Neighbors chatted freely on their porches. Kids played without being told their bikes were unauthorized property. And for the first time in a long time, the Wi-Fi signals across every home were private, peaceful, and perfectly legal. Tyler looked up from his tablet as Mark joined him on the path home. So, how's it feel being the HOA boss now? He teased. Mark chuckled. Feels less like being a boss and more like being a caretaker. Tyler grinned. Good, just don't forget to pay your HOA dues, Mr. President. Mark laughed, shaking his head. With you running the system, I doubt I could forget even if I tried. As the lights of Silverstone flickered gently in the distance, the father and son walked home under a quiet sky. a neighborhood restored, a lesson learned, and a rule that would echo in the halls of every future meeting. Respect isn't a policy, it's the password to peace. After taking over as HOA president, Mark Ellison didn't celebrate. He didn't rest. He went to work. The first thing he did was open a folder labeled System Archives on the old HOA server, and what he found didn't feel like archives. It felt like rot. Broken spreadsheets, deleted payment logs, password-protected folders named confidential reports that weren't supposed to exist. That night the clubhouse lights stayed on long after everyone else had gone home. Mark sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, his glasses catching the dim glow of the monitor. Tyler sat beside him, typing furiously, his fingers moving faster than most could think. "Dad," Tyler said, eyes narrowing, "this system hasn't been updated in years, but the activity logs show constant edits from one user." "Corinne?" Mark asked quietly. Tyler nodded, and she wasn't just editing, she was creating things that shouldn't exist. Mark leaned forward, "Show me." Tyler pulled up a folder titled Tech Maintenance, Annual Fees. Inside were dozens of invoices labeled with fancy company names: NetSecure Systems, Civic Cloud, HOA Data Consulting LLC. Except none of those companies were real. Tyler cross-referenced the supposed company bank account numbers. Every single one led back to the same routing address, Corinne's personal checking account. "Dad," Tyler's voice trembled, "she's been charging every homeowner digital service fees for over 3 years. Wi-Fi upgrades, data protection subscriptions, portal maintenance, all fake." Mark's jaw tightened. He scrolled through pages of financial logs, each one more damning than the last: falsified work orders, forged digital receipts, even emergency repair payments, approved by Corinne herself under fake signatures from former board members. "She created a ghost economy," Mark muttered, "an entire fake ecosystem to fund her control." "And it's been working," Tyler said grimly. "Every time someone paid an HOA fee online, a percentage got redirected to her. It's theft hidden behind software." Mark sat back in his chair, silent. The weight of the discovery pressed on him like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Finally, he said, "Then it's time to teach Corinne what real transparency looks like." The next HOA meeting was unlike any in Silverstone's history. For the first time ever, it was streamed live, open to every homeowner, every household, and every curious neighbor. Tyler had set it up himself, complete with real-time chat and document sharing. Mark stood at the podium, calm and resolute. Cameras framed him under the warm light of accountability. "Good evening, Silverstone," he began. "Tonight's meeting is public for a reason, because truth deserves an audience." The crowd hushed. Dozens of residents sat, phones in hand, watching both in person and online as the stream counter climbed higher and higher. Mark clicked the first file. The projector behind him lit up with an invoice, one of Corinne's fake tech maintenance forms, complete with her digital signature. "This," Mark said, "was billed to every resident, but the company it was paid to doesn't exist." Murmurs spread across the room. He clicked again. Another document appeared, this time, a bank statement connecting HOA funds to Corinne's private account. Gasps echoed. Some residents looked at each other in disbelief, others whispered angrily. One elderly homeowner, Mrs. Latham, wiped tears from her eyes. "She told me those charges were for security upgrades," she whispered. "I trusted her." Mark continued without raising his voice. Over the past 4 years, more than $82,000 was funneled into accounts that were never part of HOA operations. That's not a clerical error. That's fraud. Tyler monitored the live chat as comments flooded in. "Unbelievable. I paid those fees for years. How could she?" And at that exact moment, across the neighborhood, Inside her now quiet home, Karen watched the stream from her living room window. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications from residents tagging her name, posting screenshots demanding answers. Her reputation, once inflated by authority and control, was unraveling in real time, pixel by pixel. She tried to mute the feed, but the notifications wouldn't stop. Karen, explain yourself. We trusted you. Refund the money. The sound of her own name, repeated over and over through the digital crowd, became deafening. Back in the clubhouse, Mark concluded the presentation. This isn't about revenge, he said, his voice steady. It's about truth, and truth doesn't hide in private drives, it shines in public screens. He turned to the audience. Every transaction, every vote, and every dollar will now be logged and viewable to every member. Silverstone belongs to its people again, not to its power-hungry few. The room erupted in applause, not loud but united. And outside, as Karen's screen flickered with the final image of Mark standing tall under the HOA seal, she realized something she never had before. Power isn't taken away by force. It's lost when the truth finally loads. Chapter 8: The Karen Counterattack Expanded Version. Karen Whitmore was not the kind of woman who surrendered. For years, she had built her authority on fear, gossip, and manipulation. And now that her empire of rules had crumbled, she refused to let it end quietly. 2 days after her public humiliation, the HOA received a certified letter addressed directly to President Mark Ellison. It wasn't a complaint. It was a lawsuit. Karen was suing him for illegal digital intrusion, defamation, and emotional distress. The accusations were bold. She claimed Mark had hacked her personal devices, stolen her private files, and publicly shared doctored evidence to ruin her reputation. She even dragged Tyler into it, calling him a cybercriminal in training in her social media posts. Within hours, her online ranting went viral among neighboring HOA communities. Her post read, "Silverstone, so-called president, is a digital dictator. He and his hacker son violated my privacy and manipulated public data to make me look corrupt. I won't be silenced." A handful of her old allies, the ones who once benefited from her fake invoices, liked and reshared the post. But the vast majority of the community didn't. They remembered what Mark had revealed, the receipts, the evidence, the truth. Still, Mark stayed calm. He knew this wasn't about truth anymore, it was about desperation. What Karen didn't know was that he had already contacted the state cybersecurity division the night before the live broadcast. He'd handed them full access to the HOA's digital records, a transparent move that had impressed the agency. Since then, they'd been quietly monitoring Karen's online activities, gathering logs, and tracking her network connections. So when the court hearing began, Mark was ready. The county courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the hallways, community members filled the benches. And in the center of it all sat Karen, her posture straight, her expression smug, dressed in a sharp navy suit meant to project control she no longer had. Her attorney, a slick man in a gray tie, rose confidently. "Your Honor," he began, "my client has been the victim of an unprecedented digital invasion. Mr. Ellison unlawfully accessed her private accounts and broadcasted misleading information to the public. We demand a full investigation and compensation for damages." Mark's attorney, a quiet woman named Dana Briggs, simply folded her hands. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "we will gladly present our side, but first, the state cybersecurity division has requested to submit additional evidence." The room stirred. Karen's smirk twitched. From the back of the courtroom, a man in a navy suit approached the bench, Special Investigator Caleb Marin, head of digital forensics for the state. He held up a small flash drive and spoke clearly. Your Honor, this contains verifiable data logs and surveillance reports from our active investigation into Mrs. Whitmore's digital activities. The judge, a tall woman with sharp eyes, gestured for him to continue. You may proceed. Caleb inserted the flash drive into the courtroom display. A moment later, the screen filled with network logs, timestamps, and camera feed thumbnails. Our analysis shows that Mrs. Whitmore remotely accessed and recorded live video feeds from multiple homes in her community, without consent. By exploiting administrative access, she secretly granted herself during her tenure as HOA president. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. She monitored homeowners' security cameras, he continued, and even captured video inside private living spaces, all while charging residents tech fees to fund her spying tools. Corinne's lawyer blinked rapidly, his earlier confidence evaporating. Corinne froze, her smirk vanished. Her fingers gripped the table so tightly, her knuckles turned white. That's impossible, she stammered. Those cameras were for security, for community safety. Caleb turned toward her calmly. Mrs. Whitmore, these feeds weren't for safety. They were for surveillance, and the access credentials were tied to your personal email. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. Mark watched from the defense table, his expression composed but firm. He didn't need to say anything. The truth was speaking loudly enough. The judge leaned forward, her tone icy and deliberate. Mrs. Whitmore, you didn't lose your Wi-Fi. You lost your morals. Corinne's eyes darted to the crowd, rows of neighbors, some glaring, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Tyler was among them, arms crossed, watching quietly. The judge tapped her gavel once. Case dismissed. All charges against Mr. Ellison are dropped. However, new criminal charges regarding unlawful surveillance and embezzlement are now pending against Mrs. Whitmore. Court adjourned. The gavel fell. Reporters erupted into questions. Cameras flashed. Corinne, once the self-proclaimed Queen of Silverstone, sat frozen in her seat, powerless, exposed and defeated. Mark stood, buttoning his jacket. He turned toward the judge and nodded respectfully. Then he glanced at Corinne, not with anger but pity. Control can build walls, he said softly, but truth always finds the password. He walked out of the courtroom, sunlight flooding the hallway ahead. Tyler joined him, grinning slightly. So, what happens to her now? Justice, Mark replied, the legal kind. And together, they stepped outside, into the light of a community finally free from its shadow. Corinne Whitmore was not the kind of woman who surrendered. For years, she had built her authority on fear, gossip, and manipulation. And now that her empire of rules had crumbled, she refused to let it end quietly. 2 days after her public humiliation, the HOA received a certified letter addressed directly to President Mark Ellison. It wasn't a complaint. It was a lawsuit. Corinne was suing him for illegal digital intrusion, defamation, and emotional distress. The accusations were bold. She claimed Mark had hacked her personal devices, stolen her private files, and publicly shared doctored evidence to ruin her reputation. She even dragged Tyler into it, calling him a cybercriminal in training in her social media posts. Within hours, her online ranting went viral among neighboring HOA communities. Her post read, Silverstone, so-called president, is a digital dictator. He and his hacker son violated my privacy and manipulated public data to make me look corrupt. I won't be silenced. A handful of her old allies, the ones who once benefited from her fake invoices, liked and reshared the post. But the vast majority of the community didn't. They remembered what Mark had revealed, the receipts, the evidence, the truth. Still, Mark stayed calm. He knew this wasn't about truth anymore, it was about desperation. What Corinne didn't know was that He had already contacted the state cybersecurity division the night before the live broadcast. He'd handed them full access to the HOA's digital records, a transparent move that had impressed the agency. Since then, they'd been quietly monitoring Corinne's online activities, gathering logs, and tracking her network connections. So when the court hearing began, Mark was ready. The county courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the hallways, community members filled the benches, and in the center of it all sat Corinne, her posture straight, her expression smug, dressed in a sharp navy suit meant to project control she no longer had. Her attorney, a slick man in a gray tie, rose confidently. "Your Honor," he began, "my client has been the victim of an unprecedented digital invasion. Mr. Ellison unlawfully accessed her private accounts and broadcasted misleading information to the public. We demand a full investigation and compensation for damages." Mark's attorney, a quiet woman named Dana Briggs, simply folded her hands. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "we will gladly present our side, but first, the state cybersecurity division has requested to submit additional evidence." The room stirred. Corinne's smirk twitched. From the back of the courtroom, a man in a navy suit approached the bench, Special Investigator Caleb Marin, head of digital forensics for the state. He held up a small flash drive and spoke clearly. "Your Honor, this contains verifiable data logs and surveillance reports from our active investigation into Mrs. Whitmore's digital activities." The judge, a tall woman with sharp eyes, gestured for him to continue. "You may proceed." Caleb inserted the flash drive into the courtroom display. A moment later, the screen filled with network logs, timestamps, and camera feed thumbnails. "Our analysis shows that Mrs. Whitmore remotely accessed and recorded live video feeds from multiple homes in her community, without consent. By exploiting administrative access, she secretly granted herself during her tenure as HOA president." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. "She monitored homeowners' security cameras," he continued, "and even captured video inside private living spaces, all while charging residents tech fees to fund her spying tools." Corinne's lawyer blinked rapidly, his earlier confidence evaporating. Corinne froze, her smirk vanished. Her fingers gripped the table so tightly, her knuckles turned white. That's impossible," she stammered. "Those cameras were for security, for community safety." Caleb turned toward her calmly. "Mrs. Whitmore, these feeds weren't for safety. They were for surveillance, and the access credentials were tied to your personal email." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. Mark watched from the defense table, his expression composed but firm. He didn't need to say anything. The truth was speaking loudly enough. The judge leaned forward, her tone icy and deliberate. "Mrs. Whitmore, you didn't lose your Wi-Fi. You lost your morals." Corinne's eyes darted to the crowd, rows of neighbors, some glaring, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Tyler was among them, arms crossed, watching quietly. The judge tapped her gavel once. "Case dismissed. All charges against Mr. Ellison are dropped. However, new criminal charges regarding unlawful surveillance and embezzlement are now pending against Mrs. Whitmore. Court adjourned." The gavel fell. Reporters erupted into questions. Cameras flashed. Corinne, once the self-proclaimed Queen of Silverstone, sat frozen in her seat, powerless, exposed and defeated. Mark stood, buttoning his jacket. He turned toward the judge and nodded respectfully. Then he glanced at Corinne, not with anger but pity. "Control can build walls," he said softly, "but truth always finds the password." He walked out of the courtroom, sunlight flooding the hallway ahead. Tyler joined him, grinning slightly. "So, what happens to her now?" "Justice," Mark replied, "the legal kind." And together, they stepped outside, into the light of a community finally free from its shadow. The fall of Corinne Whitmore didn't just leave a vacancy in the HOA, it left a scar. Years of manipulation, fines, and fear had fractured the trust that once made Silverstone a community. Mark Ellison understood that rebuilding faith wasn't just about new leadership, it was about new foundations. So he and Tyler began again, from scratch. For weeks, the clubhouse turned into a miniature tech hub. Boxes of old servers, outdated routers, and corrupted drives filled the room. Tyler worked late into the night, headphones on, music low, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as lines of clean code replaced the tangled mess Corinne had left behind. Every system she built had a backdoor, Tyler said one evening. Hidden admin controls, fake data logs, remote access keys, all designed to keep her in charge. Mark stood behind him, watching the progress bar on the monitor slowly fill. Then let's build something no one can control alone, something built on transparency, not power. And that's exactly what they did. Over the next month, father and son worked hand in hand, one with experience in law, the other with mastery in code. Together, they crafted something revolutionary for their small suburban world. The Silverstone Connect app. It wasn't just another HOA portal. It was a living, breathing network of accountability. Residents could vote on every new policy digitally and see live tallies as they happened. Report issues anonymously or openly, ensuring no one faced retaliation. Track expenses in real time, with receipts, budgets, and project updates visible to all. Schedule events, request maintenance, and even chat directly with board members. Every action was logged, time-stamped, and publicly visible. No secrets, no private approvals. Tyler designed the interface to be bright, simple, and human. Each feature was paired with a line of text at the bottom of the screen. Technology is strongest when everyone holds the key. When they unveiled it at the next HOA meeting, the turnout was bigger than any before. Families came with their kids, curious homeowners gathered around the projector, and for the first time in memory, smiles outnumbered complaints. Mark stood at the front of the room. "This isn't my system," he said. "It's ours. Every resident has a voice now. Every action leaves a record. No more hidden fines, no more backroom deals. From now on, Silverstone runs on trust, not fear." The crowd applauded. Mrs. Latham, the elderly neighbor who'd once been too afraid to question her bills, approached Tyler afterward. "You made this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Mostly," Tyler said, shyly smiling. "Dad helped with the legal stuff." She reached up, patted his arm, and whispered, "Your generation might just save this place." Within weeks, the results were visible everywhere. The lawns looked greener, not because of HOA enforcement, but because neighbors wanted to care again. Children rode bikes without being chased off sidewalks. People waved at each other instead of avoiding eye contact. The sound of laughter replaced the click of Corinne's clipboard pen. Even the HOA meetings became friendly discussions rather than battlegrounds. Disagreements still happened, but they were civil, transparent, and quickly resolved through the app's voting system. News of the Silverstone transformation spread quickly. Local journalists called it the digital renaissance of neighborhood democracy. And soon, the city's annual Innovation and Community Awards nominated Tyler's creation for Best Community Tech Solution. The night of the ceremony, the Ellisons attended together, Mark in a dark blue suit, Tyler nervously fidgeting with his tie. When they called his name, he nearly froze. Mark gave him an encouraging nod. "Go on, son, you earned this." Tyler stepped onto the stage, the lights bright on his face, the plaque in his shaking hands. He took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone, his voice calm, sincere, and far older than his years. I built this app with my dad because we saw what happens when power hides behind screens. Technology doesn't control people, people use it to build trust or to break it. We chose trust." Applause thundered through the auditorium. Mark stood in the crowd, watching his son with quiet pride. The boy who once coded in his bedroom for fun had just rebuilt an entire community's faith in fairness. When the ceremony ended, Mark placed a hand on his shoulder as they walked out into the cool night air. "You know," Mark said softly, "I spent years enforcing laws to keep people honest. But you built something that makes honesty easier." Tyler smiled. "Guess we make a good team, huh?" Mark chuckled. "The best kind, one that leads by example." As they drove home, the lights of Silverstone glimmered in the distance, no longer a place of fear and fines, but of families and fairness. And somewhere deep within the system, the words Tyler had coded as the app's silent signature flickered on every dashboard, a digital oath written into the heart of their new world. Transparency is the strongest firewall. Months passed, and Silverstone Ranch no longer resembled the place it once was. Gone were the warning letters taped to doors, the constant arguments over paint shades, and the silent tension that hovered over every community meeting. Now laughter flowed through open windows. Barbecue smoke drifted lazily across the cul-de-sac. The community that had once been divided by control was now united by connection, digital and human alike. At the far end of Mapleview Lane, Corinne Whitmore's old house stood empty. The curtains were drawn, the mailbox clean, and a "for sale" sign swayed gently in the evening breeze. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood with an iron clipboard had long since vanished from its daily rhythm, replaced by calm, quiet, and peace. Mark Ellison sat on his porch, a cup of coffee warming his hands. The golden light of the setting sun painted the horizon in soft amber and violet. For the first time in years, his world felt balanced, not perfect, but right. Across the street, Tyler knelt beside one of the new solar-powered Wi-Fi hubs he had built for the community. The slim metallic tower shimmered faintly in the fading light, its LED ring glowing a soft blue as it came online. Each home connected automatically, encrypted, secure, and equal. Mark smiled as he watched his son work. "Never thought I'd see the day the HOA runs on sunlight instead of ego." Tyler laughed, adjusting the panel. "Yeah, it's poetic, huh? Powering the network with actual power." Mark chuckled. "Fitting, especially after everything we've been through." The two shared a quiet moment as the hub hummed gently to life. From every rooftop, small indicators blinked, showing stable connections across the neighborhood. Children played with drones in the open field where the old HOA office once stood. Neighbors waved from porches, using the new app to schedule the next community picnic. There were no more secret rules, no more hidden fees, just people, connected and at peace. Tyler sat back, wiping his hands on a rag. "You know, Dad, all of this started because I just changed a password." Mark turned to him, a slow, knowing smile forming. "Sometimes, son," he said, "the smallest change resets everything." They both looked up as the final Wi-Fi tower synced. A soft pulse of blue light rippled across the network, a signal linking every home, every heart in perfect harmony. The digital map on Tyler's tablet displayed the message: "All systems online, community connected." Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaling softly. "Funny thing," he murmured. "For years, the HOA claimed to keep people connected, but it took breaking the system to really bring them together." Tyler nodded. "Maybe connection isn't about control, maybe it's about choice." The last rays of sunlight touched the rooftops, glinting off the newly installed solar panels. The hum of the network blended with the sounds of the neighborhood, laughter, conversation, music drifting from open windows. It was a living, breathing signal of unity. And far away, in a quiet apartment downtown, Corinne Whitmore watched it all unfold on her tablet. She had found the community live stream out of curiosity, maybe nostalgia, maybe regret. Her name was gone from every document, every system, every login. But as the feed displayed the glowing Silverstone skyline under the dusk sky, a single message scrolled across the screen. Connection restored. For a long moment, Corinne stared at the words. The same network she had once used to control others now carried a message of healing. Her reflection flickered faintly on the screen, and for the first time in years, she smiled, not with power but with understanding. Back in Silverstone, the lights from the Wi-Fi hubs shimmered like stars rising from the ground, each one linking to the next until the whole neighborhood seemed to breathe as one. Mark set his empty cup down and looked at his son. "We built something bigger than rules, Tyler. We built trust." Tyler grinned, looking out at the glowing towers. "And it's running smoother than Corinne's router ever did." Mark laughed softly. The sound of it, genuine and free, carried across the porch as night settled gently over Silverstone Ranch. The story that had begun with a locked network ended with a community reborn, strong, secure, and finally connected. And somewhere within that glowing web of light, a silent signal pulsed through the air, not just of data, but of hope. Connection restored.